Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini. We're continuing the angle of history with the introduction of They Have Been Crowned Him by Archbishop Lefebvre, which gives a very good overview and summary of the direction of history. So we saw last time how communism and capitalism are both built on materialism. And this kind of dependence on materialism sprung from the Calvinist idea, the Protestant idea that if you are good, God will bless you materially with a material abundance. That is an indication you're going to go to heaven. So it's built on economic success. So Archbishop Lefebvre continues. At the extreme, the Protestant will look for the criterion of his justification in the eyes of God in his economic success. It is in this sense that he will gladly inscribe onto the door of his house the sentence of the Old Testament, quote, "Honor God with thy goods, give him the first fruits of all thy revenues, and then thy granaries will be abundantly filled, and thy cisterns will overflow with wine." Proverbs 3:9. So, be good and God will bless you with material abundance, is the message of Protestantism. And then he quoted Jacques Maritain, and then we pick up here. The result of Protestantism will be that men will attach themselves more to the goods of this world and will forget the eternal goods. So you can see how Protestantism did directly, or at least indirectly, prepare for communism. Communism says there is no future life. It's here. Paradise is here on earth. But you can see that was planted by Protestantism, right? And if a certain Puritanism comes to exercise an exterior supervision over public morality, it will not impregnate men's hearts with the truly Christian spirit, which is a supernatural spirit called primacy of the spiritual. Protestantism will be led necessarily to proclaim the emancipation of the temporal from the spiritual. Now it is precisely that emancipation that one will find again in liberalism. So emancipation from doctrine, emancipation from God's moral law, emancipation from truth, emancipation from modest fashions, etc., etc. Free me from all these constraints is the mentality. So he's getting to the roots, the engine of this. Now it is precisely that emancipation that one will find again in liberalism. The popes then had good reason to denounce this naturalism of Protestant inspiration as the origin of the liberalism that disrupted Christianity in 1789 and 1848. Thus Pope Leo XIII says, quote, this is from, quote, apostolate, "This audacity of faithless men, which threatens civil society every day with more serious destruction, and which stirs up anxiety and trouble in all minds, has its cause and its origin in those poisoned doctrines which spread out in these latest times among the peoples like seeds of vices, which have borne very malignant fruits in their season. Indeed, you know very well, venerable brethren, that the cruel war that has been declared since the 16th century against the Catholic faith, 16th century, which is?
The French Revolution.
No,
No.
16th century is the 1500s, so the Protestant Revolution.
Yes, Protestant Revolution. Luther and Henry V, or Henry VIII. And by the innovators, aimed at this goal of turning aside all revelation and overthrowing the whole supernatural order, in order that access may be opened up to the discoveries, or rather the frenzies, of an unaided reason. And closer to our time, Pope Benedict XV said, since the first 3 centuries and the origins of the Church, in the course of which the blood of Christians fertilized the entire earth, one can say that the church never was in such a danger as that which showed itself at the end of the 18th century. Which is what? 18th century?
That would have been the 1700s.
Yes,
The
no.
French Revolution.
So that's the French Revolution. It was then indeed that a philosophy in delirium, a prolonging of the heresy and apostasy of the innovators, that's Protestant reformers, acquired a universal power of seduction over minds and brought about a total bewilderment with the settled purpose of ruining the Christian foundations of society, not only in France, but little by little in all the nations. That was March 7th, 1917. So that's a month before Our Lady will appear in Fatima. The birth of political naturalism. Protestantism had set up a very harsh attack against the church and caused a deep tearing of Christianity in the 16th century. But it did not succeed in penetrating the Catholic nations with the venom of its political and social naturalism until this secularizing spirit had reached the academics and then those so-called philosophers, or the philosophers of the Enlightenment. So, name some of the Catholic countries that would have been in the 1500s not so affected by Protestantism yet.
Definitely Spain.
Italy.
Spain,
France,
Italy, well, France, yeah, France,
at least at that time.
yes.
Um,
And then south, at this time, 1500s, the faith is being given to the Americas at this time. So as Europe, half of it fell to Protestantism. So God will give to South America and North America the Catholic faith, mainly South America from Spain and Florida. And everything west of the Mississippi was considered part of Spain. And this part too as well, southern part. And then Quebec had this area, so, it was very under a big Catholic influence. The only Protestant arrival was the 1600s in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So the good Catholic Indians said, it's too bad the Plymouth Rock didn't land on the Mayflower rather than the Mayflower on the Plymouth Rock. Because it brought a lot of craziness and trouble and heavy persecution of Catholicism in the mid and late 1800s. I'm surprised someone didn't kill St. Francis Xavier Cabrini. She had to be protected. There's a video out that's going viral right now of a sister of a nun. She's just walking alone, and some Israelite runs up behind her and just pushes her down. And she's old. She's an old nun. Pushes her face first on the concrete. Then runs back and goes and kicks her. And so this is what's... Israel, the Jews they never know when to stop. They never know when to stop. They just club to the face of a crucifix. So, they just don't know when to stop. They're bombing Lebanon. They just wiped out Gaza. And now they're going into the people that are left and arresting them and killing them off, starving them off. These people they're just... But what's good is people are waking up to realize, Israel is not this wonderful chosen people. They're a wretched lot that have thrown off their Messiah, and they need prayers for conversion. But as has been proven over and over in history, when people get so sick of them and want to just kill them, then who steps in and says, no, you cannot just kill these people?
the Catholic Church.
It's the Catholic Church who protects them. So there's a good movie called The Scarlet and the Black. Ever see that movie? About an Irish priest who dressed up in disguise and and outwitted a lot of the German soldiers to protect the Jewish people. And Pius XII baptized a big famous rabbi in Rome, Israel something was his name. And it was a real big news for the Jewish people that he became Catholic and recognized the true Messiah. That was a big grace for the Jews. So the Catholic Church always prays for their conversion. But in the average world, in the natural world, in the secular world, I could say, when people see what they're really about, they just want to kill them. And that's not the answer either, because St. Paul says they will be till the end of the world. The synagogue of Satan will be at war with the church till the end of the world. So, on a side note, let me remind you what Brother Sidonius, who was a great historian and Catholic brother at St. Mary's when I was there. I was ordained there, and I was there for 2 years helping teach. And Brother Sidonius, he said any history books that ignore Freemasonry is not true history. If it doesn't mention Freemasonry and the workings of the synagogue of Satan, it's fluff. It's not true history. So a true historian will deal with that constant war of the synagogue against the church. All right. Anyway, let's pick up here. So the philosophers of the Enlightenment, name a couple.
Kant.
Immanuel Kant, well, yeah, he's 1700s.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Rousseau. René Descartes was 1600s, but he prepared it, yeah, with his cogito ergo sum, which means...
I think, therefore I am.
Right, and what does Catholicism say?
I am, therefore I think.
Yes. So, yes. It takes, when the French go bad, they go really bad. And Descartes was French. So a lot of trouble came from him. In reality, philosophically, Protestantism and juridical positivism have a common origin in the nominalism of the decadent Middle Ages, which led as well to Luther, with his purely extrinsic and nominal idea of the redemption, as to Descartes, with Descartes. Descartes, with his idea of an unintelligible divine law submitted to the purely arbitrary decisions of God's will. So for Descartes, everything was arbitrary. So if God wanted adultery to be virtuous, he could have said it. If God wanted stealing to be something good, yeah, he could have done it if he wanted it. It was all just based on his will, which is really stupid. It's really dumb. And it's an insult against Almighty God as being truth himself. But sound, good Catholicism and Thomism says no. God cannot make adultery something good. He cannot make stealing something good. He cannot make 2 + 2 equal anything other than 4. Oh, so you're saying God's all powerful, but he can't make 2 + 2 equal 4 or equal 7, 8, or 9? No, he can't. So then God's not all powerful. Well, God is truth, and he respects truth, which is his being. Yes.
The Catechism of the Council of Trent goes into this and has a good explanation. I won't do it justice here. But it basically says that for God to go against his nature would be a lack of a good. So for him to make 2 + 2 equal 5, it wouldn't be power, it would be a lack of power, because that would make him a liar, which is the absence of good, which is the essence of where he's almighty.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's true. That is the Catholic sound thinking. But Descartes, they're unhinged. They get unhinged from reality. Descartes needed to shovel some dirt. He needed to shovel some manure. That's what he needed. Same with Kant. They needed to chop some wood and get checked to the boards and tackled on the field. And
Smell the roses.
Hit by a pitch.
that's what a lot of these guys, that's really what they needed. They were just raised with no hard work, this palm olive hands. They didn't know what it was to sweat. And they just get stuck in their weird ideas and they unhinge people and whole generations from reality by their poisonous writings. So the church has to step in and condemn their errors. Thank God for the Catholic Church. So Descartes, with his idea of an unintelligible divine law, submitted to the purely arbitrary decisions of God's will. All of Christian philosophy, however, affirmed with St. Thomas Aquinas the unity of the divine, eternal divine law and of the natural human law. Okay, so Archbishop Lefebvre here mentions nominalism, which was from the from the 1300s. So this is the 1300s. William of Ockham. Ockham is in England. And William of Ockham was a Franciscan priest, I think. And he's the one that introduces these ideas of nominalism into philosophy, which is you cannot know the substance of a thing. So he unhinges from the Aristotelian St. Thomas philosophy. This is why it's important you get down good philosophy, true philosophy. Because nominalism will say basically man's intelligence is like a dog. A dog, when he sees a tree, he doesn't know the essence of a tree. He just sees this bark and it's a good place to go mark my territory. So it's really an attack on the true and human intelligence, the gift of reason that God gave. So I cannot know the reality. I cannot know the substance of something. So we'll dive into this deeper in philosophy. But just to say that with St. Thomas, the divine law and human law are one. They work together. Divine law is higher, governs human law is submitted to divine law. And there's no fight, there's no contradiction. But with these modern philosophies, as Archbishop Lefebvre is saying, with Descartes you get the divine law broken from human law, divorced. And this is, he's saying mainly this is the influence of Descartes. This divorce. So the divine law is purely arbitrarily, and the human law is just to avoid violence. But there's no organic, supernatural relationship and harmony between both. He quotes here, Prima Secunde, question 91, article 2, Prima Pars. The natural law, says St. Thomas, is nothing except a participation in the eternal law by the rational creature. So the natural law, which is a participation in the divine law. So they go together. There's a harmony between both. But Descartes will put a dichotomy between divine law and natural law. They're not linked together. But with Descartes, a break is already made between the divine right and the natural human right. After him, the academics and the jurists will not be long in practicing the same separation. Thus, Hewko Grotius, in 1625, summed up by Paul Hazard in these words: by divine right, Grotius tries to safeguard it. What we have just said, he declares, would take place even if we should grant what cannot be conceded without a crime, that there is no God, or that human affairs are not the object of his solicitude. In other words, God doesn't care about what happens on the earth. Since God and providence exist without any doubt, we have here a source of right in addition to that which emanates from nature. This natural right itself can be attributed to God, since the divinity has willed that such principles exist in us. The law of God, the law of nature, continues Paul Hazard, this double formula is not Grotius who invented it. The Middle Ages knew it already. Where is its character of newness? How does it happen that it is criticized, condemned by the doctors? For whom does it create a stir? The novelty consists in the separation of the two terms, which they try to insinuate in their opposition, which they tend to assert in an attempt at conciliation as an afterthought, which by its mere self supposes the idea of rupture. All right, okay. The jurist Pufendorf in 1672 and the philosopher John Locke, 1689, so that's one you should pay attention to, John Locke. He heavily influenced George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and all them. John Locke. The philosopher John Locke completed the secularization of the natural right. The philosophy of the Enlightenment, 1700s, imagines a state of nature that has no more to do with the realism of Christian philosophy, and that culminates in the idealism with the myth of the good savage of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the myth of the noble savage. The natural law is reduced to a cohesion of sentiments which man has of himself and which are shared by the majority of men. The following dialogue is found in Voltaire. So here's Voltaire speaking. Dialogue, philosophical dialogues. What is the natural law? Question. Answer. The instinct that makes us feel justice. This is Voltaire. This is the modern philosophers. So what is natural law? It's just a feeling, an instinct. It's no longer connected to the divine law and anchored in reality, as with St. Thomas here, and sound Catholic thinking. So what is the natural law? It's just an instinct, a feeling. The instinct that makes us feel justice. So it's unhinged from truth, and it's just based on sentiment and feelings. Next question. What do you call just and unjust? Answer, Voltaire. What is just and unjust appears as such. What appears as such to the entire world. So what kind of answer is that? Just or unjust is not based on God's law and natural law and human law in harmony with those, but what appears as such to the entire world, just or unjust. So if enough people think that abortion is just, then it's just. If enough people think women running around half naked is normal and acceptable in society, well, it's just. So everything is just based on man's lower common denominator of fallen human nature. Such an outcome, says Archbishop Lefebvre, is the fruit of a reason that has lost its way, that in its thirst for emancipation from God, its rebellion against God, and his revelation, has likewise burned the bridges connecting it with the simple principles of the natural order, which the supernatural divine revelation recalls, and the magisterium of the Church confirms. If the revolution separated the civil power from the power of the Church, that is, at root, because it had already for a long time been separating faith and reason for those who adorn themselves with the name of philosophers, it will not be out of place to recall what Vatican Council I teaches on this subject. So what you get with nominalism at the end of the Middle Ages is, in Catholic thinking, faith and reason go together. The supernatural and the natural go together. The church and state work together. The divine law and the human law work together. Knowledge or science and piety go together. There's no separation, no division. But with the Protestantism, with the philosophers of the French Revolution, John Locke and these guys, nominalism, they'd separate science from piety, they'd divorce it. They divorce the human law, natural law from the divine law. They divorce reason from faith, supernatural from natural, state from church. And we can almost say separate the soul from the body, which brings death. So once you separate these things, you're spinning aimlessly. So Denzinger, 1799, Vatican Council I says, not only can faith and reason never be in disagreement, but they mutually lend themselves support as well. Since right reason demonstrates the foundations of the faith. That's what we're studying in apologetics, right? Right reason demonstrates the foundations of the faith, and illuminated with the light of faith, devotes itself to the knowledge of the divine things, while faith, for its part, frees and protects reason from errors, and teaches it with a multifaceted learning. So faith elevates reason and sheds a lot of light and protects it from falling into error. And reason can know the foundations of the faith by knowing the 5 first causes, knowing the proofs of God's existence, knowing the human nature, that it's from God, and it's elevated by grace. So faith and reason go together, as the church teaches. But the modern philosophies will destroy, rip right through the middle of all this. Hence, what led to Bishop Williamson, his conversion, was when he was teaching at Cambridge University, all mostly Anglicans. He gave a speech on the proof of God's existence by natural reason. And he said afterwards, some of the other professors said to him, why are you bringing religion into this? Why are you using your mind, your reason, to prove God? Religion doesn't have anything to do with reason. But he wouldn't buy that lie. So that the Archbishop, it was St. Thomas who led to his conversion. Because St. Thomas shows, no, reason is a very good instrument, and it helps us come to the faith. And by reason, you can know some fundamentals of the faith. One, that God exists. Where there's an effect, there's a cause. Where there's movement, there's a first mover. Where there's order, there has to be an intellect that put the order there. So the Archbishop Lefebvre concludes here, but the revolution took place precisely in the name of the goddess Reason. Of reason deified, of the reason that sets itself up as the supreme norm of truth and falsity, of good and evil. So yes, in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, they'll actually sledgehammer the altar like Vatican II. They'll smash statues, especially of kings. They'll behead them. And they're still there today. You can still find beheaded statues of kings. And even so, and then they took a prostitute, a girl, and put her up on the altar and started dancing around her, calling her the goddess Reason. Reason is now free from these superstitions of the Middle Ages of divine revelation, the Catholic faith, Christ the King, heaven and hell. We're free from all this now. So you see how violent the revolution really was at the beginning. It was blood. It was just bloodshed everywhere. Beheading the king, guillotining thousands of people, good priests, some bishops, not all. Most of the bishops went with it. And many of the faithful. Name a region of France that resisted.
The Vendée.
The Great Vendée. And in Flanders as well, in Belgium, they resisted also. And in Tyrol area of Austria. So there were great Catholic resistance to the revolution. So why was the French Revolution so violent and bloody? Why? Because you had a full-grown tree called Catholic civilization, with the union of church and state, with over 1,500 years of Catholicism, 1,600 years of Catholicism in France, because the faith was brought to France by St. Lazarus, who was raised from the dead by Christ, and St. Martha and Mary Magdalene. And when they chopped this tree down, of course, there was a drip, floods, rivers of blood. But in the U.S., it was just raw soil. Maybe a few sprouts of Catholicism starting to grow, thanks to the missionaries of the 8 North American martyrs, the Franciscans who came to Florida to convert Florida. But nothing was really, solidly established, like a government that's fully Catholic and professing the reign of Christ. Everything was just pioneer days. Indians and converting the Indians. So that's why when the principles of 1789 were applied in France, it was bloody. When the principles of 1789 were implemented in the U.S. in 1776, there was no rivers of blood, because there was no tree to chop down. They could build their utopia of a godless, a Christless society, a Masonic society, without any interruption. So remember, at the Masonic Temple in Alexandria, Virginia, they designed the streets of Washington with symbols. That's not. It was the Pentagon that was. No, the pentagram and some other satanic symbols that the streets of Washington were modeled after. So at the French Revolution, they put up this goddess of reason and danced around her. And remember, George Washington, where did we see the key of the Bastille? That was at the Masonic Memorial. Yeah, so that was a very important thing. The Masons who stormed the Bastille in France to show their compatriotism with the revolutionaries of the United States, they gave to Washington the key of the storming of the Bastille to show we Masons are all buddies here. Let's set the world on fire with overthrowing Catholicism, which is what they did. So they didn't want Christ the King. They didn't want the Catholic Church. They didn't want our Lord, the reign of the Sacred Heart. Nor did they want any of this sound thinking. So separation of church and state will be a practical result of all this divorce. Naturalism, rationalism, liberalism. This is Archbishop Lefebvre. Naturalism, rationalism, and liberalism. Naturalism basically says we don't need the supernatural. Rationalism says we don't need faith, divine faith, or divine revelation. Liberalism, we don't need anything of God. Just get rid of him. We don't want him. He's a pain in the neck with his 10 commandments. We'll do just fine without him. That's the poisonous thinking. You can now catch a glimpse from this of how much all these errors overlap one another. Liberalism, naturalism, finally rationalism, which are only complementary aspects of what must be called the revolution. So Archbishop Lefebvre is laying very clear, this is the revolution, this rebellion against the supernatural, against the faith, against God, against the Catholic Church. It is the revolution. So when we speak of the revolution, that's what it is. And it's right down to Vatican II, and we're fighting the revolution still, right? The beauty about our war is it's been fought by St. Teresa of Avila and the great saints against Protestantism, St. Peter Canisius, St. Ignatius. And then we're fighting the same fight against these rotten philosophers of the French Revolution, with the great popes. And then we're fighting with Pius X, Pius IX that condemned these errors. And we're fighting with Archbishop Lefebvre and all the popes against Vatican II and the new Mass. So the battle's still going on, except we're much fewer in number. That's the only difference. We don't even have the Pope on our side anymore. He's with the revolution. Meeting with this goofy Anglican pro-abortion, pro-sodomite woman dressed in a purple castle. What a joke. So, yeah, we're just, as Shakespeare says, we few, we happy few. We band of brothers fighting in this last battle of the trenches of defending Catholicism, the reign of Christ the King, against this tidal wave of revolution. That's why I say, if you give the grace to see this, it's a great grace. If you have the grace to be in the battlefield, it's a huge grace. It's a huge grace. He doesn't give it to just anybody. If you and I have this grace, if God has thrown you the ball, you don't pop it and hide it. You got to take it and run. In football, I'm talking. You run. And you got to dodge all these big barbarians coming at you to tackle you. The devil, the flesh, the world, and all the liberal ideas. And we can't do it alone. But as St. John Chrysostom says, in this war, Christ is the referee. He's not only the coach, but he's the referee. So if you get, tackled and killed, our Lord, the good referee, he'll bring you back to life and say, here's the ball, keep running. So it's a guaranteed victory if we persevere and stay close to Our Lady. So I know this is quite an overview, but we're going to get into more specifics as applied to history once we cover Archbishop Lefebvre's first few chapters. Adjutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
We venture
Shalom et